everyone for coming. I'd like to acknowledge the land on which we stand and the traditional old owners of this land, the Wurundjeri people, and for any Indigenous people that are here tonight, welcome. I was going to talk about my previous projects and all the things I've been doing, but I guess on the way here I was reading an article by Bindi Cole, and she just talked about herself, and I found it really nice. So I think I'll just do that. So, so I've been at here for about 6 weeks now, and my work is over on that table. You're welcome to have a look, and I'll tell you about that. It's called Weightings, and it's part of a larger body that will include a whole lot of minimalist sculptures that will be made from calico, and they will be suspended from the ceiling, and they'll be filled with rice and other non-perishable food items such as salt and beans and things that can be used once the exhibition is over, as a way of creating sculptures that are both beautiful to look at but also functional and edible. Weightings came about after the last 2 years of my Next Wave project, which was called Arrival of the Raja. My background is in urban planning. I went from a very privileged private school for boys that I got a scholarship to as the first round of girls. So I was the very first year level of girls in the school and was welcomed to a very privileged boys' upbringing, which was, I guess, the groundwork for having really great access to arts and culture, but also, I guess it's sort of inevitably made me a feminist, which I didn't realise I was until other people started calling me that. And it's now a title that I'm quite happy to own. So after high school, I studied at Melbourne Uni and did a Bachelor of Urban Planning, and became very interested in civilisations and cultures in the world, and then travelled for a year with my partner around the world. We've spent 9 months in India and Nepal and Sri Lanka. Then we went to Europe, and then he went to Africa and I went to Ukraine, and got caught up in the Orange Revolution, which is where my family are from. My family are half Dutch, half Ukrainian. I can speak Ukrainian, I can play the bandura. I did Ukrainian dancing for 15 years as a child. I also have an extended family in Ukraine that welcomed me as though I had never been away. And I looked like a lot of them, but I also looked like my Dutch family. So I kind of just fit into both Holland and Ukraine. But when I arrived in Ukraine, I went and lived in the village for a few weeks, and then travelled to the Maidan, where the Orange Revolution was in full flight, and carried a banner that said my grandma's village, Lutsk. I could read Ukrainian as well, which came in handy because not many people can can speak English. So I guess then I came back to Australia and was working as a planner, as a consultant for about 5 years. And it felt like quite a drastic shift, trying to work for developers or strategic planning, thinking about the experiences that I had overseas. And we moved to Malaysia for 2 years. In Malaysia, I was working as an urban planner, as a volunteer for a women's organisation, helping women make baskets and trying to find a market for them around the world, and working on a farm stay. That experience, I guess, led me to think about how politics and NGOs and how complicated and complex the world is. While I was there, on the last day that I was working for the organisation, I was in a small village in Ipoh, and I got held up by a man with a machete who held it up against my neck, and so I guess that was my moment where I thought, oh, I survived, how pleasant. Okay, so what am I doing with my life? And I then just started painting, and I couldn't stop, and I just painted and painted for about 6 months. And then found myself pregnant and back on a plane to Australia, where I got into a course at RMIT, which is how I retrained as an artist. And then I guess that's sort of led me to my artistic practice, which has been largely about connectivity and serendipity. And I've kind of kept going back to that as my grounding, because for me, the making process is not really about this sort of sharing of information. It's about meeting people and connecting with people and bringing people together. And the serendipity happens when things just do work. And it's sort of talking about the intuitive process of making, but it's also about those random times when things are just meant to happen, and that the right people are at the right place, or the right moment happens that things actually do connect. So here's a work that I did at uni, just actually before I started uni, because I was still pregnant. And this is my immediate family. It's my sister and my sister-in-law and my brother and my partner, all crowded around my nephew. And this was something I did at uni, which was, I guess, trying to look at my Dutch side, which I've always had a lot of difficulty visually representing that, purely because I don't have any cultural knowledge to feed on. My Ukrainian heritage has always been very much visual for me, and also having the dance and the whole range of different tools that I can use as an artist. Whereas my Dutch side, my Dutch family assimilated in Australia, and really they didn't speak Dutch, they didn't have any connection. And I still feel an attachment. I've got lots of information about my ancestors. The hat that you see sort of image of is Van Loon, who is one of my great ancestors, who was painted by Rembrandt, and that's an appropriation of his sketch. I also have some very strong females on that side of the family. My Auntie Serena is a really important person in my life, and my Oma as well, who had 4 children in a foreign place, which I'm sure would have been a very difficult thing now that I've got my own children. Here's some work I did at uni, which is going back to my local area and trying to understand my attachment to the place where I stand. And this is something that is ongoing and very difficult to think about, but it seems very important to think about for my children. And so I keep going back to thinking about why I'm here and, you know, what my attachment is to this place. I have done, since finishing uni, quite a few different projects. I like to do things that are ambitious, because I feel like I have a limited time to make art. With 2 kids and the pressures of life, it seems very important to be quite bold. Sometimes doesn't go to plan, but at least it's done. This was an exhibition in Malaysia that I did last year, which was in a tomb in Chulia Street, which is in front of the main mosque in Georgetown. This is Rashid, my friend, who is a beautiful portrait painter, and this is the exhibition. This is my work in the front, which was called Colour in Action, and was suspended from the ceiling from a charcoal burnt stick, a rod. And for this exhibition, I just got 15 friends who I really believe in their practice and whose artwork really spoke to me about the actual act of making art about colour, and piled their artwork into a whole lot of bags and boxes and took them over to Malaysia. It was definitely a challenging and exhausting exhibition, but we did it, and it was beautiful, and there was some friendships made, and definitely an ongoing work potential to get some Malaysian artists out to Australia is the next step, I would hope. I just am waiting for the connections to happen so that I can fund it and make it happen. And so that's an ongoing thing. I also have been working on this personal identity project called The Well, which has happened over several parts. This was the very first part at Federation Square, which was done for the Holodomor 80-year commemoration, which was a very emotional and dark day. There was 24 people from the general community carrying the flags, and there was also other things associated with the day. There was interviews with survivors, there was videos and footage of the actual Holodomor, which is the murder of Stalin, of Ukrainians under Stalin. So there was about 10 million people killed, and there's very little historically factual or basic information. Is often very contradictory and difficult to pin down, and certainly I never learnt the history as such as a child, but I have a very strong cultural connection to that sense of loss and the trauma, and I guess exposing that was a very painful process, but also something that felt very relevant to be doing, but also that it needed to be explored deeper. So I decided to take the sculptures by themselves and just put them in a gallery space and see what happened with that. Take away the people and just have a sort of shadow with the photographs of the day, and with some sound. And again, that didn't really capture what my art making was about, because the presence of the community was very important, and the legacy of the people carrying the flags was something that I guess I became quite interested in. So I did this work, which, do you want to... Sounds from the Maidan, from BBC footage overlapping, which is why it's all muffled, and there's also the sound of an unborn child's heartbeat from an ultrasound, which are the noises that you can hear. That's probably enough of that. Escape, yep. After that, I was asked by the community to boycott the National Gallery when they had the Hermitage collection come out. I thought that was not appropriate because I didn't think that was my role as an artist. I didn't feel comfortable with being the spokesperson condemning the National Gallery for having an exhibition. But I did feel like I needed to respond to the community's requests because it's a community that trusts me as an artist. And I did feel like I wanted to explore what the potential was for activism as an artist and what my role was. So I did a performance out the front of the Hermitage and stood there for about half an hour while people completely ignored me, which was quite an interesting experience. And I've got quite a funny video on my Instagram of holding the flag while a mothers group pushed their prams straight past me and celebrated whatever it was with lots of laughter, and they literally were standing about 30 centimetres away from me, which was quite weird because I was just sort of in the middle of it all. But anyway, so I guess that kind of was an interesting exercise for me personally, thinking about what my role is as an artist in society and whether I have any kind of agency. The flags definitely had more story in them. And I thought about the displacement that happened for the Australian-Ukrainian community, and I thought about the flags, and I thought layering them together was very important. So I decided to quilt them together, which led me to quilting, which I didn't have any cultural knowledge of other than my children getting quilts when they were born. So I knew that there was other Australians who quilted. And that coincided with moving to Geelong and finding the Rajah quilt. And all of these things happened at exactly the same point in time. I couldn't tell you which one happened first. But it presented the opportunity to create a large-scale sculpture with the Geelong Patchwork and Quilters Guild and the Ukrainian Scouts that I grew up a part of, which go meet at Sockhill, which is in Anglesea every year, and connecting with the Wootherong community. And basically anyone who was interested. The National War Museum was interested, and they offered me some space to run some craft workshops. And we mobilised, and between 60 different people in the community, we were able to create a large-scale single sculpture that used all of the fabric, the same number of pieces. So the original Rajah quilt had 2,815 pieces. The sculpture had the same number of pieces. The original Rajah quilt was always the starting point for any decisions made, and embedding the stories that kind of became uncovered was really important for the making of the work. The work was going to be circular with squares in it, because to me that metaphor of the circle and the square and the square and the circle are these repetitive ideas that my work constantly refers to. And the central form was made with the poles, or I recreated the work. I didn't use the original flags, but the idea was to kind of continue that story and create a completely new form with it. And all the different people working brought their own histories, but also heard the history of the women who had made the original Rajah. I won't go into this because I don't think I've got enough time, do I? So there was quite a few things that came out of it. I guess one thing was tattoos. Lots of the women had tattoos, 36 of them. I thought that was quite fascinating, and I embedded them in QR codes so that the details would be hidden in the sculpture. So I made these embroideries that you can use your phone app, and on your phone comes these details of the different tattoos of the women. And I had lots of workshops. This is at Sockhill. There's my mum in the middle. All these different stories. People were asked to make embroideries about their attachment to Sockhill or to place or to their own identity. And these are the workshops in the National War Museum. These were... and here's a show and tell at my local quilting guild. And here's a quilt-in, which is a Victoria-wide quilting exhibition that happens every year in Geelong. They happen all over the different regions. I guess what that project really uncovered for me was this huge history and oral knowledge about quilting and about the textile world that doesn't exist within the art institutions. So they've basically created their own structures, their own competitions, their own very detailed economies. There's master quilters working alongside and sharing and making, surviving off their income from teaching other quilters. And I became quite interested in that kind of history of quilting that is not very well recorded or spoken about. Here's a QR quilt that was in the sculpture. So this one is a QR quilt that says thank you, which references many different things, including the original Rajah women. It also references and responds to Bindi Cole's work, I Forgive You, which was a work that interested me while I was making, because she is a Wootherong woman and she grew up in St Kilda, so I have a personal feeling of response to her personally. Then I guess the other thing was that connection. Many of the quilts had many different people working on them. There was between 10 people. So it was 36 separate quilts. Some had up to 10 people working on them. And this one has a quilt that responds to the embroideries that were on it. And these people all came to the exhibition that I did in Geelong at exactly the same point in time. And I was able to say, you guys are all on that quilt. And they were able to meet, which was quite a special time. I don't think I've got time to read that, do I? That's what the original Raja quilt said. Here's an installation of the work at Sokil with Ukrainian scouts. Here's me doing a performance. This was a durational work, and I did that for about 5 hours and told anyone who would listen about the Raja quilt and about this particular response and all the different stories, and basically just tried to put it in the public sphere so that people would learn about it and hear about it. This was during the Next Wave exhibition, and I did a performance with Lahenda again. This is the group that I've used quite a few times in my work because I have a strong connection. A lot of the people in the group are family and friends. And this is my recent work at ACCA, which was done not as a commission or anything. It was just me feeling like the work had to be done in a really public space to celebrate the real Raja quilt being in the National Gallery. So this work was to say goodbye. It was a farewell to the Raja. And we carried the quilts through the city from ACCA. We delivered them to the National Gallery, and the girls presented them with a yelp and a bow, and then walked to Federation Square and did the same there. And then I was completely exhausted from the Raja quilt and quilting in general, and decided I needed to get back to my roots and my kind of next project, which is a series of these minimalist sculptures. There's a book on my desk. If you're interested, you can see all the drawings. And my time at the Tapestry workshop has been very, very valuable in finding that grounding and a bit of quiet again to kind of just listen, think about making, think about why I'm making, and kind of process, not get too caught up in words, because words often lose me, or I get lost to words, or I make up words. But these words are from The Art of War. It's Master Sun's advice on how to activise a community. And it says, the brave shall not proceed alone and the weak shall not retreat alone. And it's talking about the way to get the community to work together is to get drums and cymbals playing really, really loud to activate people, and then they march all together. And the QR code will say that, and it'll be hidden in the message will be hidden in the tapestry. But I need to learn how to make tapestries first, and it's not the easiest design to try and command, so we shall see if it works. I'm not sure, but it's happening, and I'm more than a quarter of the way through. So there we go.